Hi everyone, today we'll be discussing on one topic known as dynamic rendering, which is also known as isomorphic rendering as well. But in order to dive into this further, we need to understand two essential topics for an entire rendering procedure known as CSR, client-side rendering, and SSR, known as server-side rendering. So basically, just to give you a small hint, dynamic rendering is nothing but just a combination of both CSR and SSR. So now it becomes a very essential thing to make you first understand what CSR is and what SSR means. So let us start with CSR. So CSR stands for client side rendering. Now, as the name suggests, whenever a user visit a particular website, its browsers take the entire action for its entire HTML request, which means that the browser send the HTML request to the server side, and the entire server side without any compilation accepts the request, and then it proceeds for the entire view section for the audiences, which means that if the client side approves the HTML version, then the server side can automatically approve, provided it does not care if the JavaScript is loaded or if the CSS is loaded or not. Now, one small test for you to ensure if your site is SSR or CSR is that you can install Chrome Web Developer extension on your browser, and you can disable the JavaScript option from that, and then you can load a particular page. Now, if your website is loaded, this means that your site is server-side rendering, and if your website is not loaded, it's going on an ever-going rotation. This means that your site is client-side rendering. So in short, client-side rendering means that your browser determines what all information is to be passed to the server, and server blindly approves that. Now the thing is, if you disable the JavaScript from your browser, your server would not be able to load your particular website because your JavaScript is not passed. And server-side rendering is the vice versa of the scenario, which means that the server takes the entire responsibility. The entire HTML, CSS, JavaScript, everything is compiled through the server, and then the server gives an instruction back to the browser that the website can be loaded. And due to this particular reason, whenever a server-side rendering campaign is disabled JavaScript from the browser, the campaign still becomes live because server is taking care of the entire get and pull request, not the browser. Okay, now let us understand what is dynamic rendering and does it really matter for SEO? So the answer is yes, dynamic rendering can be a healthy SEO strategy, even though if you ask me, my recommendation would be always to ensure that your campaign is SSR, because CSR is not that much SEO compliant, but there are both pros and cons, due to which dynamic isomorphic is introduced, and there is a very famous website known as Walmart that uses this particular technology. So the thing is, the bad news, or you can say the cons of having a CSR, as you know, is that if the browser is disabled from the JavaScript, then the site would not get loaded. And the good news is that there is no involvement of the server at all. Now, suppose you are running a large campaign which runs on top performing languages like Python, like Language R, or even it includes Ruby on Rails or any kind of automation programming languages. In that case, if you're using a server such as AWS or CloudFront, then your server costs can get quite higher if you're using an SSR method. So for reducing this kind of costs, big e-commerce campaigns like Walmart introduce the technology of utilizing both CSR and a combination of SSR. Now, how this works is very simple. As you can see from the screen, the entire diagram. So basically, whenever an user hits the website, first of all, the client side rendering initiates the process and they send the HTML information to the server, and on the other hand, the server side also starts its processing from only the JavaScript and the CSS. It reduces the HTML portion, so which means that this reduces the server dependency up to a certain portion, and that can reduce the cost up to a certain margin. Now imagine this way, Walmart can have tens of millions of pages, and even if 1% latency can be reduced from each server request, then in a single day itself, in a single particular day, there can be almost a saving of more than $10,000 US. Now this is a small example, but in reality there are multi-million searches happening every single day. So in a single month, in a single year, so the amount of cost saving would be quite huge. Now the only problem is that dynamic rendering can only be utilized if the campaign is having a large number of pages and you are utilizing any kind of automation technologies, else this would be quite a challenging task for your developers and this might not even be relevant. So my two key takeaways is that always make sure that your campaign is SSR. You can test the same by disabling the JavaScript from your browser and reload the page. If the website loads, it is SSR. If the website does not load, it's not SSR. It's rather CSR. And if you're working on a large campaign as your SEO clients, or if you're working for yourself, like suppose you have a large number of pages, you can adopt this particular technique where both server side and CSR can work hand in hand, and this can reduce your server latency, which means your server cost as well. Thanks for watching.